Welcome to the Bulwark podcast. I'm Charlie Sykes, and because it's December, we are lucky enough to have the return of former professor, almost soon former professor, Tom Nichols.
Almost done.
So it takes a long time to exit the federal government, doesn't it?
It does. It takes They actually want you to put your papers in 4 months ahead of time, which tells you, that something about how the wheels of the federal bureaucracy grind slowly. But yes.
So I just had a very strange experience. I want to get into your newsletter today. We're basically, grow the F up. It's time for people to be adults. Which I tweeted. I was both chastened by your newsletter today, but also persuaded, that we need to take things seriously. Before we do that, though, I just had a very weird experience. You know how sometimes on social media, particularly when I'm scrolling through some of these news feeds, you'll see a headline pop up and then it disappears. And you're not sure what it's about. So I saw this headline said MSNBC contributor can't believe Biden coronavirus, and then went away. Okay, so I just went. Okay, what was that? Who are they talking about? Is there something that was perhaps surprising about it? So, because I put together my newsletter and I have to chase things down, I actually Googled it. MSNBC contributor can't believe, and guess what? It turns out to be me.
and what couldn't you believe?
Okay. MSNBC contributor Charlie Sykes reacted negatively Tuesday to reports of this is, by the way, Fox News writing about this. Fox News writing a whole story about a tweet I put out. Reacted negatively Tuesday to reports of the Biden administration's planned measures to fight against any potential winter spread of the coronavirus, calling the reported measures nuts and suggesting they would go too far. And basically, this was reacting to a report that I think now turns out to be exaggerated, that they were going to tighten the testing for international travelers. You'd have to be tested 1 day before boarding their flights. That's not the big deal. What got my attention was that having been fully vaxxed in order to fly, and then having been tested the day before you get on the airplane, they were still considering the possibility of quarantines, a 7-day quarantine with fines. And so what I said was fully vaccinated, negative test, but still quarantined and subject to fines. Look, I'm pro-vax, I'm pro-mandates, I'm pro-social distancing, but this is nuts. So Anyway, Fox News does an entire story about that tweet. Apparently, calmer heads in the Biden administration prevailed, and they're not going to have a quarantine for fully vaxxed, tested people. And I just want to put this in context. We have 20 million MAGA heads running around, unvaxxed, unmasked, and everything, and nobody's talking about quarantine. But if I come back from France and I am triple vaxxed and I have just, tested negative, I have to go into quarantine. Clearly, this is even you, Tom Nichols, would suggest that
crazy.
This would be a little bit of overreach.
Yeah, and I saw your tweet about that, and I was like, yeah, I'm. In fact, I have gotten into trouble because I was a hard-assed mask mandate and I'm still a vaccine mandate guy.
Yeah.
And recently I said, I think the mask mandates, whether they work or not, and I think they work, but politically they seem to have run their course. That with the vaccines, people are basically now, look, either get vaccinated or get the hell out of here. And so yeah, I didn't think you were criticizing the Biden administration. I think you were criticizing an idea somebody floated that was completely crazy. But there's a second story here, Charlie, which is that there's something going on. I at Fox and a few other right wing sites where people like you and me have become a beat. I mean, I find like, like my Twitter feed is like a beat for young Fox reporters or something, because I thought, how many times does this happen? Because I always know, by the way, and this will actually link back to when we start talking about something else we're going to talk about today, which is Ilhan Omar. But, I always know when Fox has mentioned me because I start getting a bunch of really crazy and threatening emails. And there's like a half a dozen stories that are just Fox stories about something I tweeted where then I was nuked, roasted, destroyed, obliterated, whatever it is. And it's this really weird part of the right-wing ecosphere that they just sort of, watch the never Trumpers and make stories of. I was, strangely enough, I was quoted approvingly. It's funny that you were quoted approvingly in Fox. I was quoted approvingly in the New York Post, a place that normally hates me, because I was critical of a book about AOC, about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And they're like, oh, see, even Tom Nichols. And I'm like, wow, you guys spend an awful lot of time looking at
I do need to clarify that I'm not being quoted, I think, favorably. I think there's a lot of dragging the, you didn't think the, leopard eating faces people would come after you, or the head of the Claremont Institute just said, Charlie Sykes, you signed up for all of this.
Oh, I love those tweets.
Here's somebody else. I was pro everything until it affected me personally. Here's another one. Let's see. Where exactly did you think those stances were going to lead? So were mandates fine when it was just people getting fired from their jobs, but locking them up is a step too far? What do you think was the next logical step from taking a person's livelihood away? Here's somebody else. You mean you were pro jackboot on the throats of others, just not on yours? You reap what you sow. So this is kind of the theme. Here's another one. If you're pro mandates, you signed up for all that comes with it. It sucks that you're surprised by it. Let's see. You voted for this level of crazy. Enjoy. Here's somebody else. LOL. This is what you bought, pal. The Twitchy websites devoted an entire thing to this one tweet.
Twitchy.
Yeah, Twitchy.
Twitchy is the catfish swimming around in the bottom of the aquarium.
Yeah. So one last one. You own it, Charlie. He's all yours. Hope the check was worth it. You grifting fuck.
Oh, well, normally a term of endearment that you and I have used many times, but the thing about this too is it really reminds you that these are people for whom tribalism is absolute, that you can never criticize your own side. I get those as well. Well, Tom, these are your people now. And I'm like, all right, fine. If they're my people, then I get to criticize them. And unlike you folks, over on the MAGA side who are in a cult and can never criticize the great leader, okay, I'm part of a coalition where we take potshots and say, hey, I voted for President Biden, but I hope he doesn't pursue this policy because that would be bad. Like in a normal democracy.
Well, I think your next book should be The Death of Nuance. We've done The Death of Expertise, but the whole notion that if you're for some mandates, you must be for all mandates. I mean, this is the logic, right? That if you think that people should, if you work in a hospital, they require people to be vaccinated. Therefore, you would then also support having people who are vaccinated locked up and quarantined, because that's a complete logical continuation, right? I mean, this is the way their brains work. Their brains have been so broken by this that if you are in favor of anything, you must be in favor of everything, right?
Well, that's a rule they only impose on their opponents. So the same people who say, we have to have these travel bans from Africa because these high infection areas have to be walled off from the rest of us. And then I said, well, here's a map of the United States, and there's some pretty low vaccinated, high infection areas I'd like to wall off. You want to continue this conversation? Well, that's a different map. They insist on inane logical consistency only when it works to their advantage by forcing it on their opponents. And then when it comes to themselves, they live in a world of exceptions and whataboutism. Yeah, but what about? And that's not what I meant. And it's like talking to children. It's like talking to toddlers. Dangerous toddlers.
Right, dangerous toddlers who are at some point you go, this is not really worth my time. So
since you know that I've said that, Charlie, it's not. We have to stop engaging them.
Well, you use the word inane. Let's talk about your newsletter today. You have a new newsletter for The Atlantic. It's called Peacefield, which seems so ironic coming from you.
It's John Adams.
Whole John Adams thing.
It's the John Adams thing, yeah.
But John Adams is kind of a smash mouth guy.
Yeah, and he was the OG Massachusetts curmudgeon. He was, right, as the musical goes, he was obnoxious and disliked. That cannot be denied.
I was going to ask you about that. So you actually had the obnoxious and disliked thing in the back of your mind when you chose Peacefield.
Ever since I read McCullough's biography of Adams, Adams is kind of the godfather of patriotic conservatives. I mean, there's Elvis people and there's Beatles people and there's Adams people and there's just Jefferson people.
Yeah.
And I'm an Adams guy.
I'm an Adams guy as well, and also Beatles, not Elvis, so you can fight that out.
There you
So
go.
your piece today. Let's talk about this. Basically, it's grow the fuck up, people. Fight like adults. The Republicans are a threat to democracy. Stow the juvenile theatrics and take them seriously. So let's talk about this because, and as we go into this, I will admit that I have occasionally strayed into the juvenile theatrics.
As have I.
I've dropped the F bomb. You just heard this. We've talked about the former guy. So make your case for stowing the juvenile theatrics. Why?
Well, first of all, I don't think there's anything wrong with F bombs, judiciously used. And as I point out in the piece, I'm not against mockery and insulting. Because let us recall, I am the person who pioneered the use of the word asshole when talking about J.D. Vance, and I did it in print in the Atlantic. But there is a kind of juvenile streak in the opposition to Trump and Trumpism with the former guy and Drumpf and the Orange Menace and Mango Mussolini. And, it's all very funny. And Trump and the rest of them are inherently comical, ludicrous clowns. I mean, there is no doubt about it. You can't. There's something, as awful as she is, there's something inherently just funny about Marjorie Taylor Greene or Lauren Boebert or Madison, as I say in the piece, or Madison Cawthorn, whose name sounds like a bad, like a minor character in a bad Victorian novel. But these people, behind these people, are people who are deadly serious about undermining the Constitution. So while you're having a great time talking about the GQP and the Repugs and the Rethuglicans and acting like an 8-year-old, Jeffrey Bossert Clark is back there trying to unravel democracy. And it's time to grow up. It's time to say this is a job for resolute and sober-minded adults speaking with direction and fierceness and urgency.
Okay, I just have to confess this because I agree completely with what you're arguing here. Now, I do like the whole Orange Menace stuff like that, but there is something about the Drumpf stuff or the Rethuglican. Is that Rethuglican or Repub? Yeah.
Well, Rethuglican's been around for a long time. I know. That predates. Yeah.
But that's when I stopped reading. I will admit. Right. I also, if somebody sends me something with the word Republican and then there's 3 Ks instead of a C, Republic, because that's another way I stopped reading. And also, are you persuading anyone? Are you just self-pleasuring here? Well, what is going on? And
immediately I think, okay, great, thanks. That's an email from some half-bright college student somewhere.
Yeah.
Or some, student organizer who's, a C- student and everything, but an A in clever emails. And I, as I say in the piece, Charlie, and you saw this, I feel the same way about people on the right. One of the things that started distancing me from fellow conservatives was, even in my friendships, where when people, I remember, a friend of mine started saying, Killary. He kept saying Killary.
I know, yeah.
And I was like, I'm sorry, this isn't a serious conversation. Or demon rats, or, and I just went, this isn't a serious conversation. And the fate of the country is at stake here. And it's time to be, if Democrats and their allies, and I think of myself as one of their allies, not a member of their party, if we're going to turn back this authoritarian tide, we have to be the responsible adults. And that means conducting ourselves and speaking like responsible adults. And that doesn't mean we can't have fun and haul off the occasional zinger and drop the occasional F-bomb, but this other shit's just got to stop.
Okay, so I got an email. I included a link to your newsletter in my newsletter this morning, saying that I agreed with you. And Gary wrote to me just a little while ago saying, regarding Tom Nichols, he is, of course, correct. The rhetoric needs to be more grown up. But he needed to further observe that the obfuscation, outright lying, and faux post-presidential preening of President Trump were and are a huge trigger for us antis. And then he goes on, basically, good that you see Nichols' point. But even saying the term, saying President Trump depresses me beyond words. Yeah, it's the sad fact.
Well, too goddamn bad.
Yeah.
Get over it. The part of being a grown-up is that you don't get triggered by this stuff. And every time, one of the things that really bugs me is people say when they write Trump with an asterisk, or they won't say, look, this guy is not a Balrog. He's not one of the old ones who must not be named. He's not some, archdemon who will appear. He's just a sad little boy from Queens whose father didn't love him. And say his name and remind yourself that the American people and the American political process put the word president in front of his name. That should depress you. It should scare the shit out of you. And it should make you as serious as a goddamn heart attack about what you're going to do in 2022 and 2024.
Yeah, let me read one paragraph that I think captures your mood here. The 2022 midterms are only a year away, and I fear that many of us are not really ready for the kind of political battle that lies ahead. I suspect, as Michelle Goldberg recently wrote, that we're all exhausted and even in despair. I know that I am, you wrote. I was more optimistic about the future of American democracy 2 years ago than I am today. As MSNBC's Chris Hayes said to Goldberg, I have that, quote, pit of the stomach feeling that we're not okay and it's not clear we're going to be okay. I mean, that's where you are. So you're less optimistic now than you were 2 years ago.
Absolutely, because I think the people on the right, I think it's the only person who gets darker than me is our mutual friend Jonathan Last, and in part because the people on the right are coalescing. They have learned. You're seeing this with the January 6th Commission. They have learned to double down, hunker down, tell everybody to go fuck themselves, and that works, and that they'll be back. And that combined with my sense that people on the left and the center right, who are part of this democracy coalition, they are just not up to this fight. They don't understand how serious this is. They are still, and you and I have talked about this before, Charlie, they are in a circular firing squad. They're, purity testing each other. They're bickering. They just passed this gigantic and direly needed infrastructure bill, and Biden can't even get a bump out of it. I mean, this is political malpractice at every level. And I just think that we're going to be facing unified Republican government again in 2024. I really think that's a better than even chance. And if that happens, we're way, way in deep shit at that point.
Yes, we are. So shall we give an update on medical expertise?
Yes.
Should we go there?
I hear your home state has produced another infectious disease expert.
Yeah. Senator Ron Johnson, who does not feel at all chagrined about having embraced one wacky conspiracy theory or medical quackery. Is that a word, medical quackery? Embracing medical quackery. He's completely unembarrassed by it. So he's doubling down. I'm not even sure which show he's on. Maybe he's on Laura Ingraham or something like that. But Ron Johnson had some more thoughts about the coronavirus and Dr. Fauci. Let's just play this.
Killing your host doesn't help you replicate very well. So again, that's sort of the general tendency of viruses. So why would we expect anything different with the coronavirus, except for you want to create a state of fear, to keep us in the state of fear, to maintain the controls. And that's what you're seeing here in the United States. I mean, by the way, Fauci did the exact same thing with AIDS. He overhyped it. He created all kinds of fear, saying it could affect the entire population when it couldn't. And he's using the exact same playbook for COVID, ignoring therapy, pushing a vaccine. The solution to this, I've always felt, was early treatment. We still haven't robustly explored that.
Dr. Ron Johnson sharing his. So of all AIDS, that damn Fauci. He's doing the same thing he did with AIDS. Couldn't he have gone with like Alar and apples or something like that, or the monkey flu or something? He had to go with AIDS. That was what popped into his mind. AIDS.
Well, and all I could think of was The AIDS. General Tendency of Viruses, 3rd edition by Ron Johnson, MD, PhD, MOUSE.
Ron Johnson just assumes the virus is going to behave in a rational.
It's the general tendency.
Yeah, the rational self-interest of a virus is not to kill the host, right?
I'll tell you, that was. I know he's from Wisconsin, but as a Massachusetts guy, let me just say that was a real Cliff Clavin moment. Diane, the general tendency of your viruses there is not to kill their hosts, sort of like with Fauci and AIDS. Shut the hell up, you moron. I mean, it is
I did
really
not know you
incredible.
did a Cliff Clavin.
Oh, it's
You
all
do a
part
great
of...
Cliff Clavin.
It's we Massachusetts guys. It's a known fact, Charlie, that us Massachusetts guys can do Cliff Clavin. Of course, Nami here can tell you that.
Okay, so this opens up all kinds of possibilities. We should have a guest appearance from Cliff Clavin regularly on the podcast.
Or you could just interview Ron Johnson, which is the same thing. I mean, it's just incredible. And as you say, he drags in one of the most dreaded scourges of the past 40 years that has killed so many people and says, yeah, just like that overblown AIDS. And, that Black Plague thing, what a hoax that was, I mean, as you say, it's the first thing that pops into his head. And I think it's the first thing that pops into his head because it's the only thing he can think to associate Fauci with.
I think that's probably it. Speaking of crazy things, Laura Logan, who is on Fox, the former CBS correspondent, we talked about her on the podcast a little bit earlier. She went off on this bizarre rant where she's comparing Dr. Fauci to the Nazi doctor in Joseph Mengele, which was crazy in and of itself. She's apparently doubling down on that. There's been no pushback whatsoever from Fox. Anyone who is naive enough to think that, Fox is going to say, hey, this is getting a little bit crazy. No, they're not. But do you see this little interesting little tidbit where the Auschwitz Memorial tweeted something basically saying, Ms. Logan, you probably should not be comparing the Nazi death camps with Dr. Fauci or Dr. Fauci to the Nazi death camps. Laura Logan's response to being called out by the Auschwitz Memorial was to block Auschwitz on Twitter. You can't freaking make this up.
And speaking of Fox in Wisconsin, say, Charlie, is Paul Ryan still on the board?
Yes, he is.
There you go.
He doesn't live here anymore, so he's not one of us.
But with Logan, it's amazing how often people say to me, you guys, you never Trumpers, Trump broke your brains. I feel like we're the people. Yeah, we feel pretty strongly about Trump, but I feel like we're the people who are still capable of rational thought and don't have to be told by the Auschwitz Memorial not to compare, an American doctor to Joseph Mengele. Like, to me, that's a broken brain. There's something wrong there. I mean, there's just something wrong with you as a human being. Even if you blurt it out and you did it for debater's imperative or for dramatic effect, you get called out by the Auschwitz Museum and you say, I got a little off the hook there. I still believe Fauci's wrong, whatever it is you're going to say and say, but you know what? That was over the line. And instead it's like, again, what did I say a minute ago? Double down, hunker down, never apologize, and power through it. And I just cannot imagine, the first thing I thought when I saw that was, yeah, CBS was right.
Okay, so no, you're right. I mean, if I ever got called out by the Auschwitz Memorial, this would be a moment of serious introspection. That's the kind of thing that might make me even get off Twitter.
Just for a moment.
Just for a moment. Okay, so on this theme of we need to take this seriously and act like adults, I think one of the areas where it's easy to make fun, as we talked earlier, of Marjorie Taylor Greene and the Lauren Boeberts and the Madison Cawthorns and the Paul Gosars and everything, because they're so ridiculous. They are clown car folks. But on the other hand, they are also doing something that we need to take deadly seriously, which is they are normalizing the rhetoric and the attitudes that lead to political violence. And political violence is no joke. And it's amazing how we keep playing with the rhetoric and the language as the evidence mounts that, hey, this is a really dangerous time and bad things can happen. And grown-ups would say at some point, all right, we're just not going to indulge our id in saying these various things because this would be a time for us to dial things down, to be more circumspect in our language. None of that's happening. So, of course, Lauren Boebert went off on Ilhan Omar, and I'm not a fan of Ilhan Omar's politics. I want to make this clear, but she is a member of Congress. She deserves, and a human being who deserves, fundamental respect. But Lauren Boebert goes off on her with this anti-Muslim rant that she's part of the jihad squad, joking that, that she didn't have a backpack. She wasn't going to blow everybody up. Lauren Boebert got some blowback on it, just a little bit of the background on the story here, and appeared like she might be considering an apology, which of course never actually happens in the Trump era. And Marjorie Taylor Greene, who is now the ideological enforcer of Trump world, of MAGA world, slapped her down and told Lauren Boebert, don't you dare apologize to somebody who, hates America, who hates everything, who's a communist, who's, pro Al-Qaeda or whatever. And of course, Lauren Boebert, listens to her master's voice. And when she got on the phone with Ilhan Omar, she refused to apologize. The call ended badly, right? I mean, and then yesterday, Ilhan Omar had a press conference, one of those reality check moments where she said, look, this is the kind of thing that I'm getting as a result of the attacks from Lauren Boebert. Now, you know what I'm about to play, right?
Yep.
Okay, trigger warning to everybody.
Yeah,
even by the standards of this podcast. Yeah, this is rough stuff. Even by the standards of this podcast, what you are about to hear is deeply disturbing, but it is the reality out there. It is, while we're all fun and games and playing our, triggering the libs stuff, there are people out there who do what you're about to hear. And she has this press conference and she holds up her phone and plays a voicemail message. And again, there's a trigger warning. This is really rough stuff. Let's play it.
I'm going to play you a voicemail that we received hours after I got off the phone with Representative Boebert after she posted her video.
We see you Muslims saying nigger bitch. We know what you're up to. You're all about taking over the country. Don't worry, there's plenty that will love the opportunity to take you off the face of the fucking earth. Come get it, bitch, you fucking Muslim piece of shit, you jihadist. We know what you are. You're a fucking traitor. You will not live much longer, bitch. I can almost guarantee you that. We the people are rising up.
Oof. Tom, I don't know whether there's any commentary that I can offer there.
Well, I'll just point out that, first of all, I want to foot stomp a point you just made, which is I'm not a fan of Ilhan Omar as a politician or as a person, but she's a human being. She's an American citizen. She's a member of Congress. And I maintain my right to disagree with her, as a fellow American citizen. This is something completely different. This isn't about politics. This is some sad, messed up, sounds half in the bag, lost human being who thinks it's now okay. And I have to tell you, Charlie, I know we've talked about this before. I've gotten phone calls like that because I have a public office and because people just feel like that's okay. I've gotten them. A lot of people I know have gotten them. A lot of the Never Trumpers have gotten them. A lot of journalists get them. The Republican Party has normalized this as it's okay. It's okay to just do this. Now, I think some of this is the effect of our internet age where there's, I think you and I talked about this once where at least in the old days where you had to go look up a number or find an address and put a stamp on something, your rational mind or your better nature would intercede for one moment and say, your mother didn't raise you this way. Your grandparents wouldn't be proud of you. I know you're mad. This thought went through your head, but the problem is now that the echo chamber is building in volume because there are now people, as you pointed out, the conscience of the Republican Party, Marjorie Taylor Greene, saying, no, never apologize. Why not threaten people? I mean, Taylor Greene gets right up to the edge of that and doesn't endorse it, but kind of shrugs and says, but, I'd understand, right? I mean, she kind of encourages that environment, which puts her in a pissing match with people like Nancy Mace, with Boebert. Trump was the godfather of all of this with, knock the hell out of him, take him out of here on a stretcher, I'll pay your legal bills. They have normalized this kind of casual culture of threat and menace that surrounds the Republican Party. And just one more comment about this. This is the sign of a political movement that is deeply afraid and insecure. This is not how a political movement that believes in itself talks and reacts. This is what happens. Frankly, this is the kind of phone call you make, not when you think you're winning, but when you think you're losing.
Or when you think that all the guardrails are off, all the restraints are off. When
And it just makes you feel better.
When you're just feeling it, when you want to be
Right.
tough and the testosterone is flowing, and they've unleashed something. Now, again, this is a math problem for me. I think it's absolutely true that the vast, vast, vast majority, even of MAGA supporters, are not going to engage in political violence. But we're a country of what, 300 million people? How many Americans are there?
330.
330. So let's say that 99% of Americans would never engage in political violence, right? Fair enough. Would not even consider it. 1% of Americans is 3.3 million people.
Yep.
1%. If there's just 1% of the country that thinks, you know what, I've been told I need to go out and get my gun. I need to fight for freedom. I need to be more like Kyle Rittenhouse, or I need to be more like whatever. The people who are standing by and withstanding all of this stuff. That's 3 million people. It does not take a huge number of people with guns, with knives, with bombs to do a whole lot of really awful shit.
And one of the things that strikes me with this, Charlie, is I was I was talking with Canadians are just like aghast at they find this like culturally incomprehensible. But I was doing a bit with Canadian radio, and I said, you know, these are people that if you said, look, I surrender, I get, you win.
No.
What do you want? They can't answer you.
No, that would be boring.
Because that would be boring. The whole point is the struggle. The whole point is
yes.
getting off on that phone call and menacing someone, saying, if Omar said, okay, fine, I'm resigning from Congress. You've driven me out of public life. We're turning over the government to the MAGA Republicans. All right, tell me what you want. And I think the answer would be, I hadn't even thought of that. Never got that far. And I think that we saw that with during the 4 years that Trump was president. Okay, you guys are in charge. What do you want to do? Well, I want to put in some left-wing trade protectionism, and I want to put in some right-wing, performative immigration measures, and I want to, piss on NATO, but not really. I mean, there's nothing here except the kind of the primal yawp of my life sucks, and I'm pissed off, and so I'm going to threaten the life of a congressman.
Okay, I wasn't going to get into this necessarily, or at least not right now, but it looks like Roe versus Wade is going down. And I spent some time this morning reading essays from some really smart people who I really respect, saying that, okay, well, this actually might lead to a healthy moment in American politics, because now the issue will be returned to the states. It doesn't ban abortion. And the political process will have to come to some compromises, which has not been possible since 1973. So to a certain extent, this may actually lower the temperature of our politics. And I was reading that and I thought, this makes complete sense. This is right. If in fact you hadn't been paying attention to what's been going on in the last 5 years in America, if you'd been in an induced coma and had not watched the way in which our politics has become so irrationally inflamed. So on abortion, now that it goes back to the legislatures, if Roe goes down, this is the moment where we will need to compromise, at a moment when, as a country, we are incapable of that kind of compromise.
Well, I think you were the one who repeated Windsor Mann's great comment this morning. We're a country that's driven itself insane about masks is about to debate guns and abortion. What could go wrong?
Exactly.
But again, okay, you're going to overturn Roe v. Wade. Do you really believe that you're actually putting a stop to abortions? 15 or 20 states will make abortions incredibly difficult to get. The other 35 states will immediately enshrine abortion as a legal right. And then I think my worst case scenario for this, as someone who thinks that abortion has to remain legal, and I have a lot of reasons why I think that, but I won't go into them here. But as somebody who thinks that the reality is that abortions happen whether they're legal or not, is that you will go through 4 or 5 or 6 years of utter misery in these states that will restrict abortion. And then there will be a rollback and some kind of a return to something closer to Roe v. Wade. Because again, this kind of links to what we were just talking about with these threats. It's like, okay, you're going to win. You're going to overturn Roe v. Wade. Now what? Oh, well, I didn't really, because again, and I think somebody was pointing this out about evangelicals, who are more your tribe than mine, but that evangelicals didn't really care. Well, that you're more familiar with them, is what I'm saying. As a former Midwest, I mean, evangelicals to me are a complete mystery.
Yeah.
But you were inside the conservative movement a lot longer. That the evangelical movement didn't really care about abortion until it became a resource for power. 25 or 30 years ago. And I think, the problem is that this is going to be another case of the dogs catching the car, right? Okay, you won. You got this Supreme Court decision. Now, where are you going? What is your point here? And you actually, you were the one who put out that piece by Henry Olson this morning. I don't usually like a lot of Henry's columns, but even I had to agree that, yeah, okay, fine. The right wing is going to strike a big blow against Roe v. Wade. Now what?
Yeah, now what are they going to do? And Henry's stuff is, when he sticks to public opinion and analysis of public opinion polls, he's great. When he veers off into other stuff, that's when I think he becomes,
when he compares Trump to Reagan, that's when I stop reading.
Well, that's right. That's when it goes off the rails. So okay, so I should devote a much longer period of time to this, because I have been pro-life for decades. It's been one of the animating principles of my professional life, and so this is complicated, because I do think that we need to have a culture of life that includes the unborn, but also includes people who have already been born. It includes the elderly. It includes immigrants. It includes a lot of people. But over the years, I guess, I have thought a great deal about this issue, and have spoken a great deal about this issue. To the extent that I've evolved, it has been to think to regard the issue as one that is about hearts and minds, and I think that the great change that could have occurred would be to change the culture, to make it more pro-life, to make people make the choice for life. Some of the things I was involved in Wisconsin were ads that were aimed at young women, vulnerable young women, saying, you have a choice to make. You should make this. Consider this choice. Consider what this would mean for you. And it was making a difference. It was actually moving the needle. The abortion rates were going down voluntarily. And so the worst thing that I think can happen is if we try to deal with this cultural, moral issue through the criminal law. And I think that this is the danger. Now, there are, I think, legitimate restrictions on abortion, and this is where most Americans are. And I think Henry Olson's piece points this out. Most Americans are not in the extremes. They're not the no abortion, even in the case of rape or incest, and they're not for abortion at any time for any reason up until the moment of birth, including late-term abortions. That is not where Americans are. Americans actually occupy a centrist position. But as we've seen in our politics, that's a no man's land. Even though 60% of Americans may be centrist, that's not the way this will play out politically.
They don't occupy a centrist position, Charlie. They occupy an anguished position.
Yeah. Well,
and I think yes, exactly. Yeah. And that's where I am. I mean, since I mentioned the evangelicals, I have to say that my religious tradition is that I'm Greek Orthodox, which is we are allowed to choose the life of the mother. In a therapeutic situation. But when I worked in politics, I worked for John Hines, who's was a classic kind of moderate Republican of his day, right? Rape, incest, life of the mother, didn't really campaign on these kind of cultural hot button issues. And I think the mistake here, and as you say, it's not even a mistake. I think that the tinderbox is that you're going to have two groups of people going to the streets of the state capitals. One says no abortion ever, like the Texas law, and we're going to criminalize it. And the other, I think, makes the terrible mistake of saying on demand, without apology, and hopefully with federal funds.
Right.
And, that's just not, I mean, Roe, I always hated Roe just because I thought it was I shouldn't say I hate the decision. I was one of those conservatives who said, wow, this is not a decision that seems to a layman like me grounded in anything other than some Supreme Court justices saying, well, we need to do this. On the other hand, as time has gone on, I've come to admire that it did kind of extinguish a lot of social warfare to say, this is a real thing that you are not, and this is partly where I come down, a real thing that you are not going to stop from happening. All you are going to do is make it more dangerous and kill a lot of people that are already living. And I agree with your comment about the culture of life. I wish that extended to children that were actually already here, because and this is my confession about the whole pro-life versus pro-choice thing. I am very cynical about professional pro-lifers, because it always feels to me like the stalking horse for a more general issue of political power. And I've always been more comfortable with the people who, say, look, I'm pro-life, but I'm anguished. I find this a difficult thing. I understand how, most Americans feel. But the kind of the radical pro-lifers, much like the radical pro-choicers who say this is, an issue for political mobilization, that really bothers me, because it's a painful, anguishing issue. And most Americans, I think, are caught between those two camps.
Right, and I think you're going to see this played out in some of the legislative fights. And again, where normally the ideal circumstances, people get in a room and they go, okay, can we live with this? Can you live with that? Nobody gets everything they want, but I'm not sure that the political extremes that drive this debate are going to go along with that. So if they try to codify this at the federal level, what would that legislation look like? Henry Olson's piece also points out that here's the warning to pro-lifers: is right now there is a strong majority of people that oppose the kinds of things that they have decided are the litmus tests. I mean, there are, reasonable restrictions. I think, there have been polls that show that when people are asked about things like notification of parents, and let me just read it here. People have contradictory positions,
I was when I was in DC, I was at a bar now of blessed memory, the French joint that the guy defected in Georgetown. And I was in there having a drink after work, and there was a pro-choice march that was coalescing that night, and there was going to be a big, march for abortion rights. And I was talking to some of the marchers, and when they found out I worked for a Republican senator, it kind of came and I'm like, look, I'm the foreign policy guy. I don't do this. But I said, you are going to lose important fights here, because the public is not where you are, even if their hearts are with it must stay legal. And as you just pointed out, kind of trying to push the public to embrace all we believe about this as a positive good. I still can't believe that there was this whole, internet movement about shout your abortion and how did abortion, improve my life? You can't, this is not, real people. This comes back to what we started with: grow up, act like adults. Real human beings approach these situations with great trepidation and heartbreak and concern. And that's the way, or I think, normal human beings think about this, just as they should about the death penalty and euthanasia and everything that involves life. You are dealing with the most serious thing in the world, and it can't just be reduced to bumper stickers like that.
Well, I understand the argument from some of our pro-life friends who are going to say, look, as a result of what the Supreme Court is going to do, human lives will be saved. Children will be born who will grow up and live their lives who would not otherwise have done so. And this is true. On the other hand, my concern is that what's about to happen in our political culture is that the entire issue, of course, becomes radicalized, becomes extreme in the way that we've been discussing it. And as a result of that, more decisions will be made to go ahead with the abortion. In other words, there's not going to be this transition in public opinion like with gay marriage. I don't see that happening.
I thought when Henry brought that up, I thought he was off the rails. I think he was
told.
Yeah, well, the public's opinion will change, just like it did about gay marriage. No,
it could go the other way.
Yeah, it'll go the other way. Exactly.
It could go the other way. And so this is always going to be a matter of personal choice. I think there had been a trend that more and more women, and in part responding to changes in medicine. I think the ultrasound has been just a dramatic shift in people's attitudes. I think that more and more people, husbands and wives, fathers and mothers, women were making the decision to go ahead with the birth. But this may change. And so that, yes, the changing the law might save some lives, but it's not clear to me that it'll be a net gain
Well,
if in fact the culture the culture does with abortion what it is doing with every other issue that we're dealing with. I hope people understand
and
what I'm trying to
Americans,
get at here.
and the case that supports your point, Charlie, when we're talking as though this didn't happen or that we didn't have a test case, and it's called Ireland.
Mhm.
Well, the Irish said, okay, we're going to, clamp but literally, Irish mothers would go to Belfast to deliver because they didn't want to be in a situation where if their lives were in danger, the doctor would say, well, what are you going to do? My hands are tied. I know of cases where, back in the day, and it's not like I know of them. It's not like it was a big secret, but I knew people in Ireland who actually had situations where when you were about to deliver, you went to Northern Ireland where abortion was permissible. And if there was a complication, you could have a therapeutic abortion. Then finally, the whole thing is put to a referendum. And lo and behold, the Irish people said, okay, you know what? Abortion's legal in Ireland. Yeah. And I think Henry's idea that somehow everybody's going to nod gravely and say, finally, we can now be free to ban abortion, I don't think is going to happen. And I'll just add, I understand the pro-lifer argument that there will be lives saved. I understand they view it that way. I also think there will be lives lost.
Well, that's right.
And destroyed. I mean, this is not a consequence-free, moral choice. And this is why I think and maybe this is where I'm a small C conservative. This is where I don't want the government making kind of, blanket. Well, I'm just uncomfortable with the whole thing, in part, as you know, and I know we've discussed, I mean, my mother nearly died from an illegal abortion. And, it's hard for me to look at it. It's kind of like my dad was about to go to Japan before 1945. So it's hard for me to be rational about the nuclear bomb. My mom nearly died from an illegal abortion. So I've always been kind of conflicted about what to say about that.
Well, no, understandably. Well, let me just read 2 paragraphs about how conflicted Americans are on this particular issue and why this is going to be so fraught. Carlin Bowman from the American Enterprise Institute has put together this amazing study of attitudes about abortion over the years, and sort of sums it up this way. Opinion about abortion is complex. Americans appear to be simultaneously pro-life and pro-choice. Yes. Significant numbers of people say abortion is an act of murder. They also say the decision to have an abortion should be a personal choice. These are contradictory sentiments, yet many people hold them at the same time. Many see no reason to resolve the tensions in these positions. They believe in the sanctity of life and the importance of individual choice. Most Americans do not want the Supreme Court to overturn Roe versus Wade. They are, however, willing to put some restrictions on abortion's use. Although the questions are not asked regularly, majorities of Americans favor the notification of partners, parental consent for a teenager seeking an abortion, and 24-hour waiting periods. They say abortion should be generally legal in the first trimester, but oppose it in the second and third trimesters. These opinions regarding restrictions highlight the nuanced nature of American public opinion on abortion. And Tom, as we go back to our earlier talk, nuance is the most dangerous place to be in American politics right now.
Well, nuance is where adults live. Grown-ups who have, gotten past these categorical, that all cases are alike. And I think that's where, again, most people are. And I think they can be, the problem that that polling runs into is say, is abortion murder? And people are like, yeah, sure. Should abortion be legal? Absolutely. Because when you're asking them that question, and by the way, thanks for dragging me into a long conversation about abortion, Charlie.
I know.
But I think when you ask people that question, they think of, in the circumstance I am thinking of,
right,
it's bad. And in the other circumstance that I am thinking of, it's okay. So when you say, it's murder, well, because it's in the 8th month of pregnancy and it's an inconvenience and we're going to fake a therapeutic abortion to just get rid of the baby and it's murder. Okay. But if it's the product of rape or incest and it's within the first trimester and I want it to be legal. And that's the problem, is that those questions don't ask the secondary question about well, when do you think, and to his credit, Henry put some of that in there about, well, if you're a married woman, if you're an unmarried woman, if there's a fetal defect, if there's rape, if there's incest. But the notion that, well, people want it to be legal and illegal at the same time, you have to dig under that and say, in what circumstance, what's the circumstance in their mind when they're answering those questions? And I think, this is why this attempt to simply say, I'll just back up and say, I think things like the Texas law, I think it's just sadistic.
Yeah.
I think there is
was intended
sadism there that I think, but I also think that the other side that just says, well, just a clump of cells and it's like clipping your fingernails. There's a casualness and a trivialization there that I just don't think speaks to the moral sense that most people have about this.
Okay.
And I think, unfortunately, the whole debate is being conducted by people who are oftentimes paragons of bad faith.
So let's end with one of the few grown-ups in American politics. This is we want to end after having this discussion about how we all need to grow up and act like adults. Here is one of the very rare grown-ups, at least in the Republican Party. This is Liz Cheney. If you haven't heard it, Liz Cheney talking about Donald Trump putting out a statement saying he wanted to debate the 2020 election. Here's her response.
President Trump continues to make the same false claims about a stolen election with which he has misled millions of Americans. These are the same claims he knows provoked violence in the past. He has recently suggested that he wants to debate members of this committee. This committee's investigation into the violent assault on our Capitol on January 6th is not a game. When this committee convenes hearings, witnesses will be called to testify under oath. Any communications Mr. Trump has with this committee will be under oath.
Yes.
And if he persists in lying then, he will be accountable under the laws of this great nation and subject to criminal penalties for every false word he speaks.
Oh, please. Oh, bring it on.
Wow.
Oh, bring it on.
And you're right, Liz Cheney, that's an adult. You may not agree with her about a lot of things, but that's an adult. That's someone who's taking this with the kind of requisite seriousness and gravity that this situation requires. And Trump, by comparison, still thinks that this is just TV. It's just reality TV, that he can talk his way out of it. And he might. I mean, again, doubling down works because we're an unserious country with a short attention span. But if I were, up against Liz Cheney, I would be, I would be realizing that I'm up against somebody who doesn't give a hoot about my bullshit, and is just going to keep plowing away at it. And I think one thing that I worry about with the Republicans winning in 2022 is they will shut down this whole process.
Oh, they definitely will. I mean, there's no doubt about it whatsoever. We also have to mention, of course, the new revelation from former Chief of Staff Mark Meadows that, in fact, Trump had tested positive for coronavirus before his debate with Joe Biden. And our colleague Tim Miller says the evidence is there that Donald Trump actually tried to kill Joe Biden with the coronavirus, showing up in the debate, shouting, spitting, yelling across the room. And he also showed up apparently after this test with a group of Gold Star parents. And then because there's no bottom to his depravity, he actually tried to blame them, suggesting that maybe they gave him the thing. But again, this is who he is.
Well, I think depraved was the right word. I mean, this is a guy who thinks only in terms of his own. I mean, he is narcissistic beyond all reckoning. Other human beings are not human beings. They're simply raw material for him to use at any given moment. And, I thought first thing I thought of course, we all suspected this, right? And I remember we were all talking about this back during the first debate, where we looked at him and said, who's he kidding? He's sick. I mean, he doesn't look well.
Right.
I'm surprised he didn't just walk up and try and, spit on Biden or something, to make him sick. But to then go and meet with Gold Star families and cops
Yeah.
Right. Well, you can't stop them. And Hope Hicks, can't stop these people from hugging us. What are you going to do? It's depraved. It's depraved. And people are going to vote for this again. And, that's how we're in trouble as a democracy, is that there are people who would gladly put this guy in control of the nuclear arsenal for 4 more years.
And they will, yeah. And if he had spit at Biden, people would have said, hey, he fights.
He fights, right.
So the newsletter, the New Atlantic newsletter, is called Peacefield, which means that if I ever go on my own and have my own newsletter, it would be called Obnoxious and Disliked. So it'll be kind of a bookend to Peacefield.
You should hear the names we rejected, Charlie.
Tom, thanks for coming back on the podcast. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Charlie.
And thank you all for listening to today's Bulwark podcast. I'm Charlie Sykes. We'll be back tomorrow. We'll do this all over again.